Now that we've looked at some concepts about fractions and what we have to do with fractions before we can perform operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, now that we've looked at the idea of how we find the common denominator that's necessary when we're going to add and subtract fractions, remember, the twins Addie and Subby have to be in the same pair of pants. The fractions have to have the same bottoms, have to have the same denominator. So we looked at how we can find that right-sized pair of pants, how we can find the common denominator. And now we're going to take this all the way through, go through the procedure to find the answer when we're adding a pair of fractions. Now, we already looked at this example, and we saw that 5 is already a factor of 15. Whenever that occurs, that one number is a factor of one of the others in the denominators, then that larger number that is the multiple can be used as our common denominator. Now, the question would be, of course, I want to point out first, then this fraction doesn't need to have any changes, does it? Because it already had the right denominator. But this fraction did not. This fraction had a denominator of 5. It needs to be transformed into a denominator of 15 before we can add. Well, now the question might be, are we simply going to bring the 2 down here? Are we going to bring the 2 down there? And so that now we're going to say that 2/5 is the same fraction as 2/15? Now, if you just think about that for a moment, that really wouldn't make much logical sense. Then you'd be saying if you had 2/5 of a chocolate bar, that you'd have the same amount of chocolate as if you had 2/15 of a chocolate bar. And I think we understand that that wouldn't be correct. So we can't just bring the numerator down as it was. We're going to have to transform the numerator in the same fashion that the denominator was transformed. And how was the denominator transformed? Well, it was transformed through a multiplication. 3 times 5 makes 15. So we have to multiply the numerator by the same quantity in order to transform the numerator correctly. And 3 times 2 is 6. So 6/15 of a chocolate bar is the same amount of chocolate as 2/5. And I think you recognize that. Don't you recognize that 6/15 would reduce to 2/5? So this is indeed talking about the same quantity as this. Both of those numbers can be divided by 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So this is an equivalent quantity to this. And now our fractions have the same denominator. And when we add fractions with the same denominator, we leave the denominator the same, we add the numerators, and put that answer over the common denominator. So 2/5 plus 7/15 is equal to 13/15. And of course, the last thing we do is we look to see, is there a common factor we can divide out of each of these numbers other than the common factor of 1? And since 13 is prime, and the only factors of 13 are 1 and 13, and that's what it means to be a prime number, we can't reduce that fraction any, and we found our solution to this addition problem.